Good evening and welcome to Manisha for Melrose. In case you don't know, Manisha Butra has put her hat in the ring to be mayor of Melrose. I am so excited. I have been friends with Manisha for years. She's my neighbor, and I didn't really intentionally think I would become in a political situation, but she won me over, as she seems to be doing all over the place. I'm excited for you to get to know her this evening. Welcome, Manisha.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Julie.
You're welcome. So tell me, why do you want to be mayor of Melrose?
Building community and problem solving at the local level are my lifelong passion. As you know, I'm on the Board of Aldermen now, soon to be called a city councilor. And that, combined with my experience as a city planner and my values around one community open to all, that I've been able to demonstrate through my work on the Human Rights Commission and as a city councilor, kind of combined together, are things that I think I can really demonstrate and enact as the next mayor of Melrose.
Talk to me more about what you've been doing up until now. I know, obviously, you're a candidate, but tell me more about your city planning background.
Sure. So I have over 15 years of experience working with local governments, cities and towns all over Greater Boston, across Massachusetts, as well as in other parts of the country. I, for a number of years, worked at the regional planning agency for Greater Boston called Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And in that job, I had a number of different roles over 9.5 years. Working with cities and towns, towns as small as the town of Boxborough, which has a population of 5,000, is on the 495 belt, a little relatively more affluent, a little more rural, to Lynn, which is a very diverse socioeconomically as well as racially and linguistically diverse community.
So
right
you can
on
draw,
the shore.
Yeah,
right.
You can draw on all these things from all these other towns
Yes.
to maybe help some things that arrive in Melrose.
Yes.
Something that maybe someone else wouldn't have that experience of, oh, you know what this town did? They did it this way.
Yeah, I have the experience of sort of being able to see what has worked in different communities. I also, before getting elected to the Board of Aldermen, I also worked with the City of Melrose in a consultant capacity on a couple different projects. One was the zoning along the commuter rail corridor, which helped to promote economic development, basically change some of the zoning to make it easier for restaurants, for retail, as well as for multifamily housing to be located along our commuter rail corridor, which, you know, for folks in the community who have just been weighing kind of like, how do we create more revenue for our community and build on our sense of vibrancy and think about how our community can change over time. That kind of zoning really helps with that. I also, after that project, worked with the Office of Planning on Melrose Forward, which is a community vision and master plan. It covered a whole range of topics. So I got to really kind of take a deep dive, covering housing, transportation, infrastructure, facilities, sustainability, historic preservation, parks, pretty much all the things.
Right, they're in your town.
Yeah, so when I you know, was getting more involved in the city, I was coming from a place that was very informed on where our challenges are as a community and where our opportunities are as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because now, as you know, I grew up in Melrose, and so many people, we love people that grew up here, we love it, but there's a lot of people that are just discovering Melrose and coming, and I think a lot of people think it's this bubble of perfection, and I know it's not, but tell me a little bit about the things that you are concerned about, the things that you want to tackle as mayor.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start a little bit first with what I love too. I was attracted to Melrose because I felt this immediate warmth here, a sense of sort of a feeling of community in a way that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I think my first visit here and when we were in the we were house hunting. My husband and I have a now 7-year-old, but at the time he was a 1.5-year-old. We just felt that warmth and that welcome right away. And Melrose had so many of the things we were looking for. We could walk to a great downtown. I could get into Boston taking the bus and the T.
Yep.
And my husband could drive to Woburn, where his job was. So
Right.
those sort of structural elements, but also the people were what attracted us here and what continue to make me feel like this is my home, this is where I want to be, and this is where I want to keep kind of tinkering and making us better as a community. Serving on the Human Rights Commission, I think that was sort of where I got to really understand where some of our challenges are as a community. How do we bridge sort of, again, this influx of newer people like my family with folks like yourself, through which I think we've demonstrated really well with our relationship, and just being able to get to know each other neighbor to neighbor. But I think there are some sort of underlying these forces of change and people kind of having to deal with how are we grappling with those changes. I think also coming from a planning background, I've thought, okay, well, it's really great. On the one hand, we've been lauded as the hottest zip code in the United States. And then there's another side of that where
There's things that need to be done.
There's things that need to be done, and there are people who are maybe struggling to afford to stay here, or I know a number of renters who have had to, move out of the community, or people on fixed incomes who are worried they'll be priced out. So things like that. On the Human Rights Commission too, I became more aware of sort of how our increasing diversity is sort of how we need to have deeper conversations and action on how do we really demonstrate that we're one community open to all.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, it just happens in every town is buildings get older.
Yeah.
And, we have, Memorial Hall is probably in need of some help. And I think you mentioned at least one of the firehouses.
Yeah, all of them.
All of them.
Particularly Central Fire. I mean, so this is one of the things I say when people ask me about community and changing. It's like, it's not that I'm just about change. It's just that change is inevitable.
Yeah.
If we sit still, we're going to get older, and the building around us is going to start getting,
and we're not going to be the
down.
number one zippity-doo town.
Right.
Right?
So
we're going to lose that.
We have to invest in ourselves as a community, and I think we, as the city, capital C city, owe it to the community to really be honest about where we're at with a lot of our facilities. Our central fire station is in really poor shape. The other two fire stations are in better, but still not great condition. And it breaks my heart when I see sort of like makeshift accommodations for our firefighters who are there, for 24-hour shifts and putting their lives on the line. Similarly, things like we're in the queue for a library grant. I don't know if you've ever struggled to find a meeting space in the community, or wished that we had more of that kind of thing, or been to libraries in other communities. Like, we have an amazing, gorgeous Carnegie era library building. But we are actually in line for a grant to help us renovate some of the more recent additions that were done in the 1960s, while keeping the Carnegie era building, so that we have a more 21st century facility. Libraries, it's funny, I think people really do understand, but I'll just reiterate, libraries are as critical in the era of technology as they ever were. They're a place where people gather. Yep. It's a place where you can access materials at no cost. And it's a place for people who speak all languages, people who need a place to go after school.
They have those cute little programs for the kids.
They have, it's just such a central community facility. And so we're in line for a grant that requires a match from the city we have these fire stations that need repairs. Our police building is not even handicap accessible, which I find particularly embarrassing. Memorial Hall is as much the gem of our city, but then if you look around the edges, there's a lot of wear and tear and water damage, and all of our buildings need a lot of TLC, to put it lightly.
Little love.
A lot of love. But I think what we need to do is have honest conversations with the community. Say, like, here's what these things will cost, and here are how we need to get ahead on the things we see as well as the things we don't see, like our water and sewer infrastructure, our roadways, which we see, but again, it's kind of a little out of sight, out of mind until you drive over that pothole, and then you have to get your car fixed, or you know, there's so many things, and I think just having a clear process for capital improvement planning, but one that invites community input and participation.
Yes, I think that's going to be
build
lovely.
The public trust,
absolutely,
in those big expenditures that I know we're going to need to make.
So talk to me a little bit about the override. What I think some people think that it's going to solve everything, and it's not. But it's going to be helpful. Tell us what it's going to do, or how you envision it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what the override did is that for years we had this bottleneck on our local budget, and we were not able to meet. We were facing these structural challenges with increased enrollment in our schools, and aging buildings, and not being able to invest in what we need in terms of buildings and infrastructure. We talked about teacher pay. There were a lot of ways in which we were sort of spreading ourselves really thin to still deliver high quality schools, but where you were seeing that stress around the edges. The override will help to release that stress. I think it was definitely I supported it. I saw, again, through kind of being an alderman, seeing it from kind of the city planning angle, and as a parent with a child in the schools, I saw in a lot of different ways the ways in which things were feeling, our system was feeling stressed. So I think that the override, I'm very glad it passed. And one of the things I am very cognizant of is there were some really important discussions that happened in our community during that. Passing an override is never easy in any community. It's hard to ask people to pay more taxes, right?
Right.
But there were legitimate concerns that came up. I think there were there were people who felt that we haven't been very clear on our budget, and we haven't communicated our budget priorities well, or you know, there's maybe some feelings of lack of trust around how are we really spending the money, and what do we really need it for? And are we making smart decisions with that money? So that's one thing that I feel is really important is accountability. And for a couple of years in my role at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, my last 2 years there, I was in the Data Services Department, where I was in a management position, and my job was to make sure that the data and information that we were producing was communicating well. So that could have been in the form of maps, it could have been in the form of charts, it could have been in the form of narrative. And what I see with our local budget is that we're just presenting a bunch of numbers. And then one of the additions that has happened over, you know, since in the last couple of years is there's a little bit of narrative that we get. And I think that narrative is really critical. And what I would like to see us do is actually take that even further and almost think about our budget as an annual report back to the community.
Nice.
And not only use it as an annual opportunity, but communicate budgetary needs throughout the year.
So you haven't lived in Melrose all that long, and you ran for alderman, and now you're throwing your hat in the ring for mayor. Some people might think that that's very quick and that maybe this is just a stepping stone for you, for your career. How would you respond to that?
When I ran for alderman in 2017, I had no idea that the seat would be open so soon. I think it's been, and this was something I really honestly grappled with for the last couple of years, because of course, as soon as the election was over, it became clear that the seat would be open in 2019. Ultimately, this is my dream job, and not that it's about me, right? It's also that because of my time, I've jumped in very quickly in Melrose, but I jumped into the deep end right from the beginning.
Right.
Working as a planner on local issues, and so understanding them kind of from an analytical perspective. Being on the Human Rights Commission for almost 3 years, and then being an alderman, I got to see a range of things before even being elected. And then this particular term, we've had a really interesting dynamic where, again, right away, knowing that there was a change, we were reacting to a change of power. And that took our kind of first 3 months of our term after inauguration. And then immediately going into difficult conversations around our budget and conversations around the override. So, this 2-year term hasn't even been a typical term. People want to know that they have a voice in their city hall or their local government, and that we're not just making these, decisions willy-nilly.
Right.
And so sidewalks are a great example. Like, a lot of times it's like being able to inform people of, here's how we're making decisions around sidewalks, and here's where your particular roadway fits in the list. And also realizing that sometimes we're, I say that I like to have data-informed solutions, and the reason I sometimes say data-informed versus data-driven is that, there are sometimes limitations on the analytical data we collect. So that person-to-person data is also really important. And sometimes what that helps do is helps us reframe, like, the question sometimes, right? Where sometimes it's like, if you're looking, again, from a bird's eye view, you see, okay, here's all these connections we need to make. But when you're doing the person-to-person, you can fact check it a little bit and say, does that resonate with you? Is that your experience as, someone living on this street? Or, what's your, I think just being able to talk to, and then what's really gratifying is when you find that the data in the analytics actually match up.
Yep.
And then it's like, okay, now there's actually anecdotal information, qualitative information that matches the quantitative.
Well, I think what happens,
and that helps us form great strategies.
I think what happens to some people is, like you just said, like, let's say I was calling for something and you said, you are number 7. And if you, in the list, we're going to be coming out to your house after these things are done. And when you look at the things and they seem more significant or whatever, I think just even that, like, you feel like you've been heard. Yeah. I find a lot of my neighbors that don't get a call back, or, it's like, they just get fueled by the idea that they're not being heard. Right. Even if it's not the most dramatic thing going on in their life, it's just kind of that feeling of like, oh, here we go. Nobody's calling me back or whatever. So I think that your idea of, I don't know if it's, what is it, transparency? Is that the right word?
I'd say some of this is just a focus on constituent services and a focus on communication and accountability are all things that I've been thinking about very actively, of how do we showcase the way we're doing things better. Do the showcasing better, but also make improvements, right?
Yes.
Like, nothing's perfect.
Well,
and I think
old.
owning that, right? Owning that, here's the imperfect system we're following, but I think a lot of times we're not always even sharing the system that we're using. And so people just think, again, it might be because so-and-so got this because they are connected
somehow. Yep.
And then at the same time, I do want to take that data-driven approach so that we are thinking about things, that making equitable decisions too. So you absolutely deserve attention if you're calling several times and you deserve a response. But just because you were someone who called 10 times, if somebody only called once or twice, but we go out and see, okay, this is it's a really serious issue, or this is a particularly heavy traveled roadway, and maybe the folks on this particular road aren't in as strong a position to advocate for themselves all the time.
Right. Then you're going to make that educational decision.
Not
just reactionary.
Right.
I don't want this person to call me again.
Right. So I think it's like balancing that sort of, we want the feedback from people, but we want to be able to tell them how we make those decisions, so that they, again, know. And I think people respond to that really well, that kind of communication.
Definitely. And so I find it fascinating, but it is true that canvassing is like very powerful, right? Yeah. I found that surprising because we live in such a high-tech world. Now, not to say that Facebook and all the Twitter and all that stuff doesn't have its merits, but you have been canvassing every day.
Yes.
And how has that been going? What is your feeling? What kind of feedback have you been getting?
One of the things that's really powerful to me is, besides that face-to-face contact, is literally standing on someone's porch, right? And it's one thing to hear in the abstract what it's like to live on Upham Street, or like to live near the hospital, or like to be on a really steep road in the Highlands, or in Ward 7, or like near Swains Pond, or, all of these things. Or
Brazil Street.
Right.
We'll get there.
And each community, each neighborhood has its own personality, and you really get a flavor of that and a deeper sense of that when you're out canvassing. And I think it really is going to help inform me, and it did certainly when I ran 2 years ago at large as a candidate again. So this is my second time doing that citywide approach, and it's really given me a lot of insight into some of our city's challenges in a less sort of academic, bird's eye way.
Yes. Yeah. So I have to ask you, because it's been in the news, Brazil Street here in Melrose, 4 homes with some pretty significant sewage issues.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it? How do you think it was handled? What's your take?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of lessons learned, or we're still getting more information, but there are a lot of thoughts I have on what's happened so far. And for me, it's a lot more about, like, what can we do better in the future? I am currently an alderman now. I think I am sort of in this space of wanting to let the administration do its job, but also feeling like I would have liked better communication, so that when residents ask me what's happening, that I have a really good answer for them, and that it's not just please call City Hall, right? Because that just sort of feels like a brush off. I think the ward Alderman McMaster has done a terrific job of just reaching out to those 4 affected families and individuals who were, just that's like the worst, like it's one of the worst things you can imagine. Mayor, I would want to be out there right away, on the scene, talking to each one of those residents, telling them we're going to do whatever we can. Like, there's a liability aspect. I understand that. We can't promise the world, but I think just being physically present,
to say I can see how serious this is.
Exactly.
This is the number one thing I'm going to do today.
And this is not something that it's neither an act of God, so it's not like a natural disaster, and it's not something that they caused. So even regardless of whatever, is found to be the city's stake in what happened, it is certainly something, as far as I can tell from what I understand so far, nothing that any of those residents could have prevented or predicted. I think going forward, it's just like really understanding that constituent services is at the heart of what we do. That is how we build public trust, but it's also why we're there. We're there to serve the community.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, the part that's been most upsetting to me is feeling like there's a little bit of a vacuum of that right now, that we haven't really been on the scene. And I think I've felt frustrated because, again, as an alderman at large,
people are asking you.
People are asking me, and then I'm also like, what's my role in this? Because I don't want to sort of step on the toes of the mayor's office or the ward alderman, right? I respect each of those roles, and I will continue to in a new role. And so those are the things I think about, but also just, you know, it makes me think about emergencies anyway, right? We really need to have a clear protocol for who gets informed when something happens, who needs to be mobilized, what's our legal protocol, what's our public works protocol, what's our health director, you know, health department protocol.
Right.
And making sure that everybody in City Hall really understands and knows that,
like knows what their steps
the counselors.
Are. Right. Tell me about, so September, when is the primary?
The preliminary, it's a preliminary, and I don't know if, I think this is why it's called a preliminary. At the local level, we're nonpartisan.
Right.
So the preliminary will narrow it down to the top 2 vote getters. So whoever of the candidates get the most votes come in first and second.
Okay.
Make it on to November. That's on September 17th.
So September 17th, then November 5th.
November 5th is
actual
general.
Okay.
So that's going to include, I think by then they might be city councilors. I don't know what's going to be on the ballots. I still think this is funny because we're in this funky transition period.
Right. So what's going to be on your literature?
But it'll be alderman, half of the school committee, and the mayor's office are all going to be on the ballot.
Okay.
So.
Okay, and so you are looking for more volunteers, right?
Absolutely.
So I'll canvass again if you want to come out.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, there's other jobs too.
Yeah.
What are they?
I mean, definitely the biggest thing is knocking on doors, because it's just a lot of, we have an active voting population and we want to get out to them. But we also are going to be doing other events. Meet and greets and house parties, or if your neighborhood has a block party. Those are all things that are really helpful for our team to know, or for you to host for us. Because again, the more it's these types of conversations that really make the difference.
Totally.
It's like you now then tell your 5 friends and they tell their 5 friends, and maybe one of them hosts another party.
I love parties.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Let's have another party.
It's exactly, and it's a great excuse.
It
to
is.
Maybe have a little bubbly and hang out with your neighbors.
Exactly, but then really feel like you can comfortably ask some questions that maybe you didn't feel comfortable in a bigger forum. Yeah. But you still want to be mayor.
I do, and I know I'm in for some really tough conversations.
And why do you want to be mayor?
I love tough conversations. I love, because I think a tough conversation really reflects that the person on the other side of the conversation is deeply passionate about what it is, something, right? They care about an issue, and ultimately that's something we have in common, right? So there is a commonality, and from there being able to build on what's our common ground and how can we use that to then have a negotiation or have a conversation that gets us beyond, being stuck. And I think it's all the mix of the things. There's the technical pieces of the issues. There's the opportunity to be a mayor in the greater Boston region, where we're making decisions on things that affect us, but our neighbors as well. There is that being able to be out on Main Street and hear from constituents and really kind of problem solve and think differently. There's a whole variety of reasons, but ultimately it just combines all of it. Makes sense.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. You have been watching Manisha for Melrose. I hope you have enjoyed it. Good night.